Buongiorno a tutti. Welcome back to part 2 of my Essential Italian Restaurant Phrases series, where I guide you through all the phases of Italian dining so that you can ace your next visit to an Italian restaurant. In part 1, we cover phrases for when you arrive at a restaurant, make a reservation, and order your food like a true Italian. But what happens during your meal? What if you need to ask about ingredients? How do you order wine? What about dessert and coffee? And of course, how do you pay the bill? That's exactly what we're covering today. And just like in part 1, for each situation, I'm going to give you two options. A super simple phrase for total beginners and a slightly more advanced one for upper beginners and intermediate learners. If you haven't watched part 1, you can still benefit from this video, but I highly recommend watching part 1 to after this one for the complete picture. So I will link the link in the description. And at the end of the video, let me know in the comments which of these phrases do you think you will use the most in your next trip to Italy. Ok, iniziamo. Let's begin. Okay, the first thing I want to share with you today is it's how to ask about dishes. This could be extremely important if you have some dietary restrictions or food that you just don't like. So the easiest way to ask this is, does it contain X? So in italiano, contiene X. And so just substitute X for whatever food you don't want. So for example, contiene carne, does it contain meat? Contiene latte, does it contain milk? Contiene aglio, does it contain garlic? And so forth. So just learn the Italian word for that specific food or ingredient that you cannot or don't want to eat and ask, contiene questo? Now, a slightly more advanced version of this question is this one. Quali sono gli ingredienti di questo piatto? Which ones are the ingredients of this dish? So, as you can see, you're asking the same thing, just in a more refined and complex way. Quali sono gli ingredienti di questo piatto? And then you can have a more detailed answer. Okay, still talking about dietary restrictions, a question you may need to or may want to ask is if that dish is suitable for vegetarians, vegans, or people with celiac disease. So the easiest way to ask that is this: va bene per, and then you add. So va bene per means is it okay for? Because va bene is the Italian way of saying okay. So va bene per vegetariani? Is it okay for vegetarians? Va bene per vegani? Is it okay for vegans? Va bene per celiaci? Is it okay for celiacs, people with celiac disease? And in Italy, we are very, very careful and attentive to these requests nowadays in restaurants. So don't fear asking these at all. And in my experience, all restaurants in Italy nowadays have options for any of these requests. Okay, now let's see a slightly more complex way of asking this question. You can use this phrase, which means, is this dish suitable for? So it's a more complex form and it's very natural for us. That's how we would probably ask that in a restaurant. Questo piatto è adatto per, in Italian, adatto per means suitable for. So questo piatto, this dish, is suitable for, and then you add the category. So, questo piatto è adatto per vegetariani? Questo piatto è adatto per vegani? Questo piatto è adatto per celiaci? That's the best way to ask this. Okay, when you want to make sure that a dish doesn't contain a specific ingredient, the easiest way to say that is using niente. Niente means no, as in nothing in Italian. So if you want a no gluten option, you say niente glutine. If you want a no sugar option, niente zucchero. If you want a no milk option, niente latte. So that's the easiest way, and that's a way you will find a lot in menus and even in sometimes in packages. Niente, per esempio, niente glutine. Now, the slightly more advanced version of this is asking if that specific dish is without something. So, questo piatto è senza glutine? Literally, we're asking, is this dish without gluten? Because senza plus the ingredient is the Italian way of saying ingredient free. So, for example, in English you say sugar free. In Italian we say senza zucchero. You can say milk free, but in Italian we say senza latte. So literally we say without the ingredient, the name of the ingredient. Quindi, questo piatto è senza glutine? Questo piatto è senza zucchero? Questo piatto è senza latte? That's how you ask if that dish is something free. Okay, next up, let's learn how to ask for things at the table. You may need something else that's not there. So how do you ask for that? The easiest way to do that is posso avere X, per favore. So, per esempio, posso avere un cucchiaio, per favore? Can I have spoon, please? Now, if you don't remember posso avere, which is a phrase I think you can learn, and it's going to be very helpful even in other situations, but if you cannot remember, even just saying un cucchiaio, per favore, is perfect. So whenever you want to ask for something, just add per favore. If you can remember the phrase, even better. If you want a slightly more complex, advanced phrase, then I would recommend this one. Può portarmi X? So, can you bring me X? And then you add whatever you need. Per esempio, può portarmi altro pane? And then you can add grazie. So we're not using per favore in this instance. You can also say grazie after a request. That's also totally appropriate. This is slightly more complex because we are using the indirect pronoun può portare a me. So può portarmi, but that's also what we would probably use. So può portarmi altro pane means can you bring more bread, please? Grazie, thank you. Okay, by the way, as always, I did for the previous video, I'm giving you a PDF, a free PDF to accompany this lesson, where you will find all the phrases that we are learning today with the translation. So please remember to download that PDF to easily review your phrases. You can take that with you in your next trip to Italy, and you can review that whenever you feel the need for. The link to download the PDF is, as always, in the description of this video. Ok, continuiamo. Next phrase is something that you will need when you want to order wine. So the easiest thing that you can ask is for a glass of wine, un bicchiere di vino. And you can specify which type of wine you want. So for example, you can say un bicchiere di Chianti, so a glass of the specific wine you want. A more complex form of this is this one, un calice di vino, un calice di vino. So what's the difference? The difference is this, calice still means glass, but it's that specific type of glass that you have in restaurants for serving wine. So this is a more elaborate version of saying un bicchiere di vino. Un bicchiere di vino is perfectly fine, but if you want to sound very knowledgeable, you can say un calice di vino. Per esempio, un calice di Chianti. And you will probably notice the word calice written down in menus sometimes as an option. So now you know what that means. It's just a fancier way of saying bicchiere. Okay. Other options for ordering wine that are not necessarily easier or more difficult are asking for a bottle of wine, for example. That's una bottiglia di vino. and then you specify the wine. So, per esempio, una bottiglia di Montepulciano. Or you may also want to ask for the house wine. So, il vino della casa. That could be il bianco della casa, the house white, or il rosso della casa, the house red. Okay, let's talk about ordering dessert. Remember, as I explained in the video about how the restaurant experience works in Italy, I'm going to leave the link to that video too. The dessert is the thing that you order at the end. No one orders the dessert with the other courses. You wait until you finish your meal, and then if you want, you can also order dessert. So you will need to ask for the menu of the desserts. So how do you say dessert menu, please? That's menù dei dolci, per favore. So this is the easiest way you can ask for that. Now, like we just saw with bicchiere and calice, we do have a fancier way of asking for the dessert menu, because in general we do call the dessert menu, we don't call it menu, but we call that carta dei dolci. That's just the way we do that. So we have menu for primo, secondo, contorno, antipasti. And sometimes some restaurants keep a separate menu that's called la carta dei dolci for desserts only. So if you want a more advanced version of this, just ask this. Posso avere la carta dei dolci, per favore? And they will be happy to bring that to you. Now, let's talk about asking for recommendations. The easiest way, no, asking for recommendations is definitely not something super simple, okay? So if you want to do so, you will need to get ready for this a little bit, because I understand that this phrase is not that super simple, but again, it's one of the most useful sentences that you can learn. So it's worth it, the effort. So the easiest way to ask for recommendation is to say, lei cosa preferisce? That means, what do you prefer? So you can ask that to the waiter or to the waitress. We're using lei because you are strangers, probably. So it's good to use the formal you, lei. Lei cosa preferisce? And they will point their favorite dish from the menu. A more advanced version of this is, what dish do you recommend? And the Italian way of asking that is, che X piatto mi consiglia? So this is more complex as a form, because again it uses the indirect pronoun in this case. So mi consiglia, do you formal recommend to me? Per esempio, che primo mi consiglia? What first course do you recommend to me? Che vino mi consiglia? Che dolce mi consiglia? Just practice this phrase, repeating out loud many times, and it will sink. And it's a very good phrase to know, even outside the restaurant. Okay, let's go to ordering coffee, because you can have a coffee at the restaurant. Just don't ask for cappuccino. We talked about that in the first video. So I refer you to that for the explanation. So if you want a coffee, remember that in Italian we don't say an espresso, please, because the coffee that you drink outside your home is always an espresso. So we just say un caffè, per favore. Simple and effective. A more complex way is asking for something more complex, which is un caffè macchiato. And that's the alternative I suggested if you want cappuccino, but cappuccino is usually not served in restaurants. So you can ask this. For this, caffè macchiato is an espresso with a little bit of frothed milk. So you can ask, posso avere un caffè macchiato? Perfetto. Now, speaking of coffee and drinks that you take at the end of your meal, it's very common in Italy to have some liquor at the end of the meal, and the most common is probably limoncello. So if you want a limoncello, just ask un limoncello, per favore. Something more complex, and if you want to try something else, something other than limoncello, is asking them, what digestive what liquor, what digestive they have. So amaro is a type of digestive liquor that's very common in Italy, and we have different types and brands. So you can ask them, che amaro avete? What amaro do you have? And we usually ask this with the plural you form, as I explained in the previous video, because when you talk about a restaurant, you're not just talking about one single person, you're talking about a team, and a business that's made of more people. So we usually use the void form to ask generic questions about the business. Che amaro avete? Okay, finally, let's talk about paying the bill. So the easiest way to ask this is just to say il conto, per favore. The bill, please. That's it. Super simple, super effective, super correct. Il conto, per favore. If you want something more complex, you can ask if you can pay with credit card or with cash. So let's see how to say that. Posso pagare con, can I pay with? And then you will add carta di credito if you want to pay with a card, or contanti if you want to pay cash. Posso pagare con carta di credito? Oppure posso pagare con contanti? Or we can just say posso pagare contanti? Perfetto. Okay, now you have all the essential phrases that you need for a complete Italian restaurant experience. Remember, the key to mastering these phrases is to use them. So here's what I want you to do. Pick one phrase from this lesson and write it in the comments. Tell me, which phrase do you think you will use the most on your next trip to Italy? And I read every comment and I would love to know. And if you haven't watched part 1 yet, where I cover how to arrive at a restaurant and order food, make sure to check it out. The link is in the description. I'll see you in the next video. Ci vediamo al prossimo video. Ciao da Valentina.